Hello, and welcome to the Being Human podcast, where we explore what it means to be human, physically, mentally, and spiritually. We upload an episode of this podcast every single week, so whether you're new here or a repeat offender and you have not yet, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss any of these episodes. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Iron Dr. Has. Dr Hussain Al-Zubaidi has quite the resume. He is a lifestyle and longevity doctor and coach, a Team GB triathlete, a member of the Royal College of GPs, an advisor for Swim England, and runs an NHS lifestyle clinic and fitness club. Basically, Has is a mastermind when it comes to physiology, when it comes to health and fitness, particularly as it pertains to endurance sports, to triathlons. The primary reason I had Has on the podcast today was because I wanted to talk to him about Cain and Cain's Ultraman event. For anyone that doesn't know, Ash is a good friend of mine, and for the past few months he has been embarking on what he has named Ultraman, which is a world's first, a world record attempt. He has ran from Land's End to John O'Groats, cycled from John O'Groats to Land's End, and is currently just about to finish kayaking from Land's End to John O'Groats. So that's up and down the country 3 times, running, cycling and kayaking. He's going to be the first man in history to do it. This podcast should be dropping on a Thursday, and he is planned to finish on Saturday, the 20th of July. And has been Ash's coach for this. Has designed the training program for Ash. He laid out the parameters of the challenge in terms of the pace that Ash will be running at, cycling at, how many miles he'd cover each day. Has coached Ash through this whole thing and has been an integral part of Ultraman, of the Ultraman challenge. And this was a conversation really diving deep, really nerding out on the physiology of it all, of the biomechanics, the nutrition, the S&C, all of the training, all of the protocols involved. And as we went through all of that, Has shared so much knowledge, so much wisdom on all of the aforementioned areas. There is something for everyone to pick up here. The challenge itself is an incredible thing. Obviously, it's something that's close to my heart, something I'm very personally invested in. But regardless of the challenge, there is so much value to be had for everyone in this. Tips on how to improve your nutrition, how to fuel yourself for endurance activity, how to train for endurance activity, all round how to improve your health, fitness and lifestyle. Something in it for everybody. Has is a great guy. I respect him highly. He's got so much knowledge to share. I do not doubt you will find a great deal of value in this episode and enjoy the conversation. If you do, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below, share it around on social media, help support Being Human and the podcast's growth. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting Being Human. The Being Human podcast is brought to you by Grappler's Coffee. This is the strongest coffee I have ever tasted, but it is beautifully smooth. This is not just for grapplers. This is for anyone that enjoys good coffee and wants to enhance their performance, whether that's physically or mentally. All you need to do to pick up a bag of this is to head to mrbassets.com and use the code WAG10 for 10% off your order. And don't forget to pick up a bar of Grappler's soap or this Grappler's balm while you're there. Everything that Mr. Bassett's does is great quality, all natural. I mean, this Grappler's balm right here, I could literally eat it. And you know what? I'm going to eat some right now on camera. Tastes delicious. So if you want not just coffee, but soap and balm that you can eat as well as put on your body, head over to mrbassets.com, use the code WAG10 for 10% off. And now presenting Being Human with Iron Dr. Has. When did you first meet and speak to Ash about this challenge, and what were your initial thoughts when he came to you and said, I want to run the length of the UK, cycle the length of the UK, kayak the length of the UK? No one's ever done it before.
Oh, thanks, Aaron, for having me on. So we first met on a Channel 4 daytime TV show. So I do a fair bit of media work, generally either representing as a clinician, as a doctor, or from my physical activity background, talking about sort of the importance of movement and incorporating into our lives. And we met there. And in fact, I was probably one of the few people that didn't know Ashley Cain. I had no idea who he was. I was obviously spending too much time reading books. And something came up on the TV while we were in the green room before the show was airing. There was a video of him climbing a relatively steep climb on his bike. I think now that I know, I think that was probably his trip where he cycled either to Rome or one of his sort of long trips that he's done on the bike. And so I connected with him because I saw that. I know that anyone that's going to hit a serious mountain climb, they've got my respect. And so I just started sort of asking questions in the green room, not really aware of his platform or his background, and just finding out that he was an ex-professional football player. So there was just a lot to relate to and to understand. And like right from the get-go, like within a few minutes, like we'd hit it off. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd already missed my rehearsal because I'd rather chat to this guy. And we sort of formed a kind of a bond there. But afterwards, I just told him it'd be great to connect. If you ever need, for example, any support or you'd want to go on a ride or a run, please just give me a bell. And we exchanged details. And so, I thought, that was that. And it was probably a year after that I got a call. And I remember I was in the middle of a medical conference at the time, and he sort of rang up and he said, like he was wondering if he could get my support and something on a challenge that he had. And so I thought maybe, he wanted to, run a marathon or even an ultra marathon, maybe even an Ironman. And we met up over coffee one afternoon. And I thought he was joking when he laid down what his challenge was going to be. He firstly mentioned that he wants to run the length of Britain. I was like, okay, wow, that's a lot, but doable, probably, hard work. And then he goes, okay, and then after that, and I was like, what do you mean after that? Then I want to cycle back down. I was like, right, okay, fair enough. And then when he chucked in the kayak at the end, I thought he's just bananas. I was like, the reality of this probably coming into sort of fruition was pretty minimal. And I was like, I was unsure as to like whether I should devote so much time and effort, because it would take a huge amount of time and effort to take him from where he was to making a challenge like that reality. But yeah, no, that's how we met, and that's how he first dropped the bomb of the Ultraman challenge on me.
So you said about taking him from where he was to where he needed to be in order to do something like that. Where would you categorize where he was at that stage? And how would you define where he needed to be? And what was that time span that he stipulated to you that you needed to take him from A to B?
Yeah, so if you start off kind of where he was, like that sort of baseline point, he'd come off a great endurance challenge of kayaking the Yukon, which I'd say is probably more mental than physical, like a bit like what Ultraman is. It's a great physical feat, but it's just the mental ability in those tough conditions and with the kind of dangers that they have to face on that kind of challenge. So I knew that obviously he was built of great stuff. But from a kind of physiological perspective, when we did those baseline tests, like he was by no means a what you'd call a high quality endurance athlete. Like he was probably average, maybe even average to poor in some indicators. And a lot of that wasn't just down to sort of lack of actual time in the training element, but he had a number of injuries, serious injuries that was affecting his biokinetics, so the running economy, so when the amount of energy you need to sustain a certain pace, like it was poor. So for him to cover, for example, 10 kilometers, he needs a lot more energy and effort and put a lot more pressure on his the whole biomechanical system in order to achieve that. And what we had was a body composition which wasn't set up for this kind of challenge. High weight, so he had a high body mass index essentially, and a lot of muscle there. And for sure, we want strength even in endurance athletes. And I spend most of my time trying to emphasize the importance of strength training for endurance athletes, but it's very different kind of strength. We're not talking about the kind of bulk that he has. And of course, there are a number of really impressive ultra athletes that contain, and that they hold a lot of muscle. It doesn't mean that they are optimized for that activity. Yes, they do it, they achieve it. But for example, you're never going to get a guy like Ash winning Ultra Trail Mont Blanc. You know, you're never going to get a guy like Ash winning Marathons des Sables or the bike race across America. You know, that's just never going to happen. They're going to be more my kind of body type. They're going to have, you know, very, very low body fat percentage. Yes, decent muscle strength, but nowhere near the kind of strength that sort of an Ash body type has. And just as a reflection, we have a strength program that we will put our endurance athletes through to improve the running performance after there's many miles in the tank. And we get them to sort of work out the 1 rep max, for example, in a squat, and then they do a 10-week program where they do various percentages of that to sort of work it up. You know, his 1 rep max was off the table. You know, like we just didn't have, even at the highest end of performing athletes and triathletes, etc., we didn't have people that could 1 rep max what he could on a squat. So like we were off the chart, and it was quite interesting to try and work out when I was technically had to get him to do a certain weight that I was like, surely that would destroy a man, you know, if you did it that many times for 10 weeks. So it posed a lot of challenges as to how we adapt someone like him that has serious strengths in certain areas, but serious deficiencies in others, to get him over the time period, which was about 7 months that he set it in. So 7 months often sounds like a long time, but it's not. You know, it really isn't. A lot of the time when people set their New Year's resolutions, they expect results within 2-3 months. And everyone that's tried will know that you can't really get major results over that time period. If I could have picked, I'd have done at least maybe somewhere between 15 to 18 months to get him ready. And so I was hesitant. I was really hesitant at first as to whether it was kind of achievable to get him where he needed to be to complete this challenge. And so like it was part of it was his confidence that he would be able to stick to the plan religiously. And everyone often says that at the beginning. They're often like, they're fully in it, they're mentally committed, but when the real tough work comes, that's when often the excuses come out as well. You know, this session's been missed, or I couldn't do that. And if I'm being honest, I thought that was going to come from Ash because he's got so much on. You know, he's here, there, and everywhere. And so I thought, you know, the reality of him being able to squeeze in the amount of training that was required to achieve it. But credit to him, like the man didn't miss a session. I think there was actually one session that he wanted to miss, and he rang me. He literally rang me. It was about 10:30, 11 at night. Okay, and he was just like, he was so apologetic as I was saying, I'm not going to be able to do this particular session. I was like, is this the first session that you've even contemplated missing? Like, I'm impressed. I'm seriously impressed.
So let's go into the weeds of it. What was like an average week looking like for him? I suppose let's go to the macro first in terms of he gave you 7 months to build him into the Ultraman ready to do this. What on a macro kind of structure did that look like in terms of phasing? And then if you could just take us into like what a typical week would have been like for him in preparing for this.
Yeah, fair enough. So I divided it into 4 phases. The initial phase was essentially optimizing him ready to be able to manage the training load that we're going to get in the middle phases. Okay, so he had come from doing the Yukon, but he had like a month off. He hadn't done anything really of significance in that month, and yes, he was optimized for some kayaking, and that probably hadn't left the system, but he hadn't done any serious running or cycling for many months. So phase 1 was all about getting him ready. And what did that include? It included certain priming activities. So this was getting sort of baseline ideas in terms of his running performance, in terms of his injury status, and also just trying to get him ready on all the various disciplines, that he has the right equipment in order to do it. So we had to invest in particular bits of smart tech in order to monitor his physiology as we went through. We had to make sure that he had access to proper smart bikes, because on the smart bikes you can actually dial in workouts. So for example, yes, if you get on your bicycle and ride outside, you can do some basic training. You can go based on perceived effort and do intervals up climbs, for example, and there's a lot that can be done on that. But when you have a smart bike and you can assess the cadence, the power, and you can build in a program that he can just follow, then you just get the results are just maximized. We can make sure that we hit the right power ranges to work different elements of his physiology, whether that is improving his aerobic base, which is kind of where he was going to spend the vast majority of this challenge in. And so that's in trying to work at maybe 60 to 75% of what we call the FTP. That's the functional threshold power. And yes, most of his training on the bike worked in that range because that's where he was going to be operating. But what we also need to do to make that most effective is you also need to do workouts working on the VO2 max, not because he's going to utilize it, because he's not going to get in a race and go full tilt. But when you push up the ceiling of your performance, your physiology, the VO2 max, which is sort of the maximum amount of oxygen that you can take in and utilize, by pushing up that ceiling, you bring up your aerobic threshold. So if your ceiling is low, then you can do lots of work at zone 2 aerobic work, but then you're sort of going to really squeeze in on that ceiling. So you sort of push up the ceiling so you can bring up that lower zone. And then we work on trying to improve his strength in terms of muscle fatigue. He had great sort of all-out power, but what I wanted to know was, will his muscles be able to sustain 5 to 8 hours of work without getting injured? Okay, because yes, I want to try and maintain performance through that time period, but what I cared more was the biggest thing that was going to derail him from completing this challenge is him getting an injury that he can't continue through. It's such a long challenge that you can't just grind out a number of the injuries you get. There's some that you can, and there's some that would just end it. So I needed to get him to a point where you build kind of the sachet where it's going to be resilient enough to go through the training and then through the events. So that was phase 1, priming him up. And that led into the next 3 phases. Now, phase 2 was all about building his kind of his ceiling. So working on that kind of VO2 max, working on his performance, trying to get him better utilizing energy substrates, whether that be his fat that he contains centrally or carbohydrates that he's got in his liver, his muscles, or he's consuming. And then phase 3 is about just working on that lower zone aerobic capacity, trying to get him mentally able to do 5 hours on the bike, 3 to 5 hours running. Just you need to train yourself mentally as well as physically to be able to do those kind of distances, because he didn't just need to complete the marathon. Often when people are training for a marathon, they'll do maybe 30 to 33 kilometers as their final long run, and then they'll grind it out and push it out on the day to do the full 42. But Ash wasn't just doing a marathon then putting his feet up. Like, a marathon had to feel like his 5K run to most people when they're just going out. He had to be able to do it and then do it again and do it again. So a lot of that third phase was about trying to build in an appreciation and a tolerance to his body to recover from the stress we're putting in. Because the simple concept of training is very easy. It's a triad where you apply stress, you apply rest, which allows the body to adapt, and then you repeat. You just do stress, recover, repeat. And you just keep doing that. And what you'll find is people at the beginning of their journey, that recovery will take a fair while before you feel able to stress yourself out like you did last time. But what I needed to do with Ash is to reduce the time period that recovery takes. So therefore, on the event itself, he's able to maintain and to recover from the insults that each day was bringing, because otherwise it would just accumulate fatigue that will lead to issues down the line where he will just simply hit walls. He will simply not be able to push any further. And I think it's not achievable with the challenge he had to wake up the next day and feel the same. Like, that's just no human can do that. But the aim was to try to make that deficit as small as possible. So therefore, by the end of the challenge, he's able to make it there, if that makes sense. And then the final phase, phase 4, was what we call a taper. And many people may know about that. This is where we're now starting to reduce the load to get him physically optimized to his best capacity come the start. Because there's no point in him getting to that start line and already be knackered from heavy training. You have to allow that taper. And it's that build and that taper which most worried me in the 7-month target that we had. Because with 7 months, we have to give about a month and a half to build at that first phase, month and a half to slowly taper off the kind of load that he does, I'm not left with many months in the middle. So in reality, we had to sort of shorten and speed up those two elements in order to sort of get him there. I maintained more of the taper because that was really vital to go into this big challenge. But that build up was more aggressive than I would have done in another athlete where we had more time.
And in terms of in that building phase, was it an even split between running, cycling, and kayaking? Did you split it down into those proportions, or did you see an area? You mentioned obviously he was coming off the Yukon. Were you, for example, maybe emphasizing the running more or the cycling more because you felt as though he had a better baseline, he didn't need to build as much with a kayak, or was it very much an even split?
Yeah, so based on his initial strengths, I would probably have put kayaking as number one in terms of efficiency and ability. Cycling was number two, and running was actually third, which in fact, running was his favorite discipline. It's the bit he enjoyed the most. But it was a combination. He had a really serious soleus tear back from his football injury, and he had a number of pins, and the combination of that meant that his running economy was really poor. It wasn't great for as a training conduit. So what I mean by that is if I wanted to improve his physiology, doing it through the running wasn't a particularly effective route because he couldn't hit certain speed ranges because of those serious injuries, if that makes sense. So, and then another element is that running is always more injury prone. You know, it's weight bearing. You're putting 8 times your body weight through the joints. And don't get me wrong, like running is totally safe if you do it right. If you have good, strong biomechanics and you're always making sure that you apply enough recovery, but it is just more injury prone. So generally, most triathlete based athletes will do the majority of their training on the bike for that reason. And that's where we focused initially on. He probably had a 50 to 60% of his training time on the bike because it's just brilliant at working that cardiovascular fitness in order to get him to that point where he can run better and he can kayak more efficiently. But he does that while minimizing the impact on his muscles. Any of you that does big amounts of running each week, you'll know that it's the main challenge is trying to recover from the muscle fatigue. Your legs ache. With cycling, you don't get that same impact. So you're able to go again and go again, even do 2 workouts in one day. It's just easier to do. So the bike is a really useful tool for that. The other reason I use the bike is because you can control the workouts. With the smart trainer, something like a Watt bike, for example, or a Wahoo kicker, you can control it perfectly. We can say exactly the power that he needs to do in order to hit different ranges, whether it's his anaerobic physiology, pushing up the VO2 max, working on his zone 2. We can do that very, very easily. With the run, yes, you could apply some treadmill workouts, but you still require him to change the speeds, understand and remember what he's doing. When you're working flat out, it's the last thing you can probably remember. So for a number of reasons, the bike was focused on. The running, of course, there was training in the running, but what it was mainly targeted at was improving his biomechanics. So we worked through to make sure his gait was efficient as possible. We did strength training, really focused specifically on improving his running economy. So we wanted to improve his soleus because he had a big mismatch from right to left. So I wanted to really strengthen the soleus. So we had a very specific soleus program to get him ready and prepared for that. But we also want to make sure that all the muscles that stabilize the knee joint and the ankle joint are as sort of strong and resistant to fatigue. Because a lot of people, when you start off and you see them run, they have a good gait, good biomechanics. Now, for example, if you go to an event, watch them near the end. At the end, if let's say you're watching the London Marathon, etc., oh God, the gait is awful. It's terrible. And it's one of the big differences between your elites and your amateurs. Elites know that instead of trying to push and tense through to maintain speed when you're fatigued running, the key job that you need to do is maintain form. You need to direct all your focus and whatever remaining energy you have to keeping smooth form, because although it doesn't feel natural, you want to just drive and just try and drag yourself, you are way more efficient. So often people go, oh, those pros, they look like they're barely even working. Us normal people are pushing so much harder, but no, they are. They're just maintaining their form as the method of staying on top of it, but they are dying. Okay, they are dying inside and want to stop. And my one tip for people listening and want to improve the kind of long distance running, it's about get someone to take a video of you at the start of your running and what that gait is like, put it in slow-mo, take it from the side and from the back, and then look at what your form is like near the end of your run when you're starting to get tired. And you want to make sure that you emulate, you keeping your feet up, you're not dragging through, you're not hunched over, because when you hunch over, you then can't get enough air into your lungs and you change your balance and posture. And so working with Ash, it was all about trying to make sure that, look, we're not going to break land speed records when you're doing over a marathon every single day. We need to make sure that you do that marathon in the most efficient way possible. So a lot of the runs that we did was all targeting at trying to get that gait right and get the sort of muscle fatigue in those key muscles to a point where they can endure the impact.
Yeah, he said to me himself that the S&C you put him under was a game changer for him. What exactly were those exercises that you used to help strengthen his soleus, strengthen the muscles around the knees? What were those specific exercises?
So for the soleus specifically, like that is probably the most kind of under exercised and most important muscle for runners. Like if they want to actually either reduce their risk of injury or improve their performance. Now the soleus is the muscle that sits deep in the calf. You have two muscle groups. You've got the gastrocnemius, which are the ones that you can see. When you look at the back of someone's leg, you can see two heads. That's the gastrocnemius. It's got two heads. Now the soleus sits deeper within. Okay. And now both the gastrocs and the soleus, part of what they do is when you push your feet up and you go on your tiptoes, they are working to achieve that. Okay. Now, if you want to isolate the soleus, which is probably the most important muscle for long distance running, you need to bend your knee. So put your knee into a bent position. And then what you then need to do is push up from the floor. So go onto tiptoes, but maintaining the bent knee. And doing that, firstly, with both legs on the flat, and then you work up. So once you can achieve, let's say 12 repetitions of that over 3 sets, and you're able to do that without losing form and getting right up to your tiptoes, you then move on to doing it with one leg. And then once you achieve that, you then look to go onto a step, or for example, a staircase, where you put half your foot on the actual lip and you allow the back of your foot to actually go below the line. And you're doing the same thing with one leg. And then once that's good, you then carry some weights, some kettlebells or some dumbbells, and you're now doing it weight, and you're slowly increasing the strength of that soleus. Now, another really important element to work on the calves was skipping. So skipping is great because not only does it improve cardiovascular fitness, but it improves the strength. Anyone that knows that does skipping for a while, your calves start to, they start to get really hot and they're burning and they're painful. And not only is that helpful from a muscle strengthening perspective, but it's what we call a plyometric because you're doing an active movement that is stretching the tendons and the ligaments and putting the body through that kind of bouncing, which is mimicking in many ways movements of running. You build in that resilience to cope with it. So we would add in sections of skipping through that. Now, the soleus was really important for Ash, but important for any runner. The other elements that we did was abductor muscles are super important for when you start to get tired. Often, if you look at a runner that's getting knackered and you look from them from behind and you look to see if the legs are sort of crossing the midline, and often people will notice it because they'll start hitting their knees. When one leg is going past, they'll just scrape the knee. And that's telling you that your hip and your abductors are starting to get weak. And so the hip starts to drop. And so one of the exercises we'd get him to do is he would stand up on a block, one leg on it, the other leg dangling, and then he'd keep raising his hip and then hold it there for a few seconds and then let it go down. Just trying to train in that fatigability so that the hip doesn't drop and get the impacts of that. The other exercises that we did for his running strength was around doing a sort of half squat. So the reason we didn't do a full squat is because when we actually analyzed it and we compared different programs in a sort of clinical trial for runners, they got no extra benefit in doing a full squat, and you actually probably increase your injury risk slightly. So this is not specific to everyone, but if people are just focused on improving running performance, the half squat is more than enough. And the final bit is the leg press, but single leg press. And that's really important that it's single leg, because when we run, it's a unilateral movement. You're doing, obviously one leg at a time. So doing a single leg press, which would be quite high weight and low reps, but this is just trying to improve his, ability to withstand a lot of weight, which Ash brings, and that it doesn't put too much pressure on the joints, and we don't have too much pressure on the bony attachments where the ligaments go in, because often that's where you get issues like stress fractures, which are very common with athletes. And in fact, Ash unfortunately did get them, but luckily near the end of his 880 miles, however long it bloody was. And so without those kind of exercises, I fully suspect that he would have got those stress fractures earlier. And so, for example, if you look at his cousin Mix, she got a stress fracture much earlier, really quite early in the challenge. And it just shows that for the vast majority of people that would take on that kind of challenge, and Mix, trust me, is a incredible athlete of her own right, many would have got stress fractures because of it. And if you'd like, I'm more than happy to go into some of the specifics around, how stress fractures and how kind of injuries can be really common in endurance events like this, and what we did in particular, for example, to his nutrition to try to minimize that.
Yeah, no, please do.
Okay, yeah. So there's something which used to be called the female athletes triad, but was renamed because as we learned more about it, we realized that both men and women get it, but women to a much greater extent. And so it's now been renamed Red S, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. And what it basically means is if you're putting more stress on the body that requires a certain amount of energy for the body to recover and adapt from, and if you do not apply enough energy in your nutrition to meet those demands, you eventually lead to this imbalance. And that imbalance is then made up by the body breaking down bone, muscle, and all the various structures in order to get the building blocks to achieve that. And so it leads to this cycle, which can build up over days to weeks and lead to problems like stress fractures, like tendon injuries, and a whole range of other issues, including actually impacting your hormones. And a number of the sort of female athletes that I work with, like losing their period, for example, is really common. And there's often this perception that that is normal, that, once you get to a certain level of athleticism, that somehow that's normalized, but it isn't. It 100% is not right. If you are losing your periods or they're becoming irregular, that is a sign that your body is not coping with the demand you're putting it on. And it can happen to both men and women. And that was the thing that I was most worried about with Ash, because he was putting so much load on. And then he also had a lot of commitments. After these sessions, he'd often have to meet up with lots of people, go to an event, do a television or radio broadcast. And what was happening was he just wasn't consuming enough energy in order to balance it. He just didn't have the time. And so, really early on, and in fact, like heightened by what happened to Mix, because yes, she's more prone because she's a female. She doesn't have as much of the energy stores that Ash does. In fact, his muscle bulk came really handy here because he has something useful to break down, rather than if you don't have that muscle there, you're going to start breaking down other elements which are really vital. But we had to make sure that he consumed enough calories to bring up that balance and that deficit. And for male athletes, the comparative change that females get with their periods is that you actually lose erection quality. You can really struggle with erectile dysfunction if that training load is way higher than the energy consumption that you're having. So I'd really recommend people that are highly active, which is brilliant, to look at Red S. And there's a particular charity called Project Red S who have lots of useful information for people to read to make sure that they're fueling correctly to meet their needs and their training requirement. Because you do not want to do these kind of workouts if you're not fueled correctly. The body just simply won't be able to cope day after day with that kind of training load. And the rates of especially young women struggling with the impacts of red S is much more common. And the problem is that they don't even know what it is. So they don't link it. They think the stress fracture was just bad luck, or that muscle injury was just bad luck. But often it's because of this underlying condition that definitely needs more awareness.
So round about how many calories did you want Ash to be consuming every day in training and then in the challenge itself?
Yeah. So in training, it varied from day to day based on the kind of load he would have in. On sort of his heaviest days, we're talking in the region of 5,000 to 5,500 calories for him to consume. On the rest days, you would not get him to consume just what his baseline is. For someone of his weight, would be about 2,700 to 2,900. You get him to consume more just because the actual increased requirement lasts for a number of days afterwards. It sort of slowly tapers down that amount. So I'd say he probably wasn't on anything lower than 3,100, 3,200. And the composition of that is what's really important. You know, we really made a push for just clean nutrition, okay? Just making sure that he eats whole foods, that he's getting lots of fruit and vegetables, because the key element of them is that they're really high in polyphenols, okay? Now, polyphenols is a natural compound that plants produce to try to deter predators from eating them. They give it that bitter flavor. So if you think of like blackberries or you think of cherries, you know, that tart flavor that you often get from fruits, that's to put off certain animals from eating it. But these polyphenols are exceptional. They're in a class that you may have heard about, antioxidants. Now, what antioxidants do is they bind to free radicals in the body. And free radicals are essentially sort of these toxic chemicals that are produced from various different bodily processes. Let's say if we both went out on a flat out sprint and we repeated that 5-6 times, we built up lots of fatigue, lots of ache, you're going to have a lot of free radicals going through the body. And if they do not get excreted or bound and made inert, then they cause a lot of stress and damage to the body. These antioxidants bind with free radicals, stopping them from causing damage. So I'd really recommend people to think about how they can increase the polyphenol content. And best way to do it is to look for brightly colored fruit and vegetables. And chief amongst them are anything that's red, purple. Those colors are probably have the highest concentration. The other element, of course, in something like this, where we're kind of building his performance, we have to get protein in. And like, he has a great collaboration with MyProtein, and so he had lots of various options to pick from in order to utilize it. And it's about him not just going crazy with one meal of high protein. You need to get it often. You just need to have little doses throughout the day, because the body can only absorb so much, and we need to make sure that he has it on tap essentially throughout, rather than just having, let's say, a big protein shake just after the workout. That's great, but a lot of that's probably just going to end up the other end because you can't absorb so much in one go. So he would try to regularly have something first thing in the morning, last thing as his sort of last thing before he goes to bed, so that he has that throughout the day in order to support his recovery. And the bit that gets a bad rep, which is carbohydrates, is probably the most important macronutrient of an endurance athlete. It quite simply is, from the free energy sources of protein, carbohydrate, and fat, it's the most effective fuel source for the engine. Simple as that. It's like, for example, if you get the V-power or the high quality fuel, that's what your carbohydrate is. Protein and fat, yes, they can be an energy source. They're just not as an effective energy source. So the carbohydrates, they're a big group, and they contain lots of different things within them. And I think the bad rep comes in is when we see refined carbohydrates in processed food. Of course, we want to steer clear of that. Yes, your endurance athlete that's burning that many calories probably doesn't need to care as much, as long as there's a balance there. But even still, I encouraged him to eat long-acting, slow-release carbohydrates that weren't processed, things like bulgur wheat, things like buckwheat, like brown rice. And I was doing that not just because it would help him from a performance perspective, but because I wanted there to be a lasting kind of legacy of what we were doing. I wanted him that even after this challenge, he was going to be a better athlete and have better health himself. And one of the things he was open about and discussing with me is that he wanted to improve his nutrition. That was one of the areas of weakness. He was great at doing a training program, maybe not so good from the nutrition element. So we incorporated lots of healthy foods. And I was honored to have him, in fact, at my home. And we would often show him some meals as examples of sort of pulling it together. And so those carbohydrates are kind of like the bedrock of what you consume and what you utilize. And you have to separate. Often people get confused with dietary fats and the fat in our body. They are totally different. It's not like you eat dietary fat and then it suddenly becomes fat in your body. Any macronutrient and that energy source, that can become fat in your body if you have more than what you require. So if you eat way too much protein, that eventually will become fat. It gets broken down into all the various amino acids. Your body doesn't have a natural way of storing protein, unlike carbohydrate and fat, because carbs get stored in your liver and your muscles. Dietary fat can get stored subcutaneously as your fat, but protein doesn't. So it gets broken down into all the various bits. The nitrogen gets ejected out of the kidneys in your urine, in what's called urea in your urine. And then the remaining carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen molecules, they just form fat. So the key element when we talk about dietary fat is that, look, if you're eating it in a balanced way and you're focusing on healthy sources of fats, okay, then they're brilliant. And they're really good in particular for improving immunity, for improving overall physiological functioning in the cells. There's lots of elements within it that it's really important to incorporate dietary fat in. And if we think about how your body then utilizes those energy sources, there's two main forms that it will rely on. If we are going for a gentle, low intensity activity, the majority of your energy is going to come down from breaking down your fat. Okay, we call that fat oxidation. Now, as you increase intensity, your ability to rely on your fat stores and that fat oxidation slowly reduces. It can't keep up, essentially. And so there comes a time where suddenly the carbohydrate requirement goes up. So once, let's say you're running a bit faster, and in fact, in the lab at Loughborough University, we worked with Ash to find that exact point. I wanted to know exactly how hard does he have to push on the pedal, how fast does he have to run before his body starts to switch over to the carbohydrate. And you may think, why do I care so much? Well, it's because if I need to decide how he should pace these days, I need to make sure that he can get to the end of the day with the stores that he has and the food that he can consume in that time. And so by knowing at what pace he suddenly needs to utilize more carbohydrate, I can guide by that, because you can only really survive maybe 2.5 hours on carbohydrate if you were going at that intensity before you are out, before your liver is emptied, your muscles are emptied. And that's where people often hear the term the wall. You hit the wall when essentially you have run out of carbohydrate to utilize, and your pace will suddenly drop right back down, and it drops down to that fat threshold. Because you have plenty of fat left, it'll take ages to burn through all your fat. Even for those that are super slender, okay, you still have more than enough actual fat to power you. And so that wall is suddenly you have lost that carbohydrate engine capacity. That's gone. You've emptied that fuel tank. So now all you can utilize is the fat bit. So you just physically, you want to run faster, you can't. You're just using that base element. So understanding that, we could pace it at a point which was just above the fat oxidation threshold, because it was okay to use the carbohydrate stores. I just didn't want them emptied at the end of the day. I wanted them to be still at a point where he could then refuel and then start the next day with a full tank again. So you kind of have to be mindful. It's kind of like in a Formula One race. They could just go crazy and have more pit stops, but we don't have that ability. If I got him to, let's say, do fast stints and then consume lots, it would have just put so much more pressure on his muscles and his body. So what we try to work out is how can we no stop it? How can we like get across this entire race with the fuel that we've got in the most efficient way possible?
So all the training said and done. 24th of April was when he started this, the 3-year anniversary of Azaylia's passing. Leading into it, going into it, how would you categorize the training having gone? What were your thoughts then? Because obviously, going back to the start of the conversation, you said when he first told you about it, you were thinking the chances of success are very, very small. Were you completely sold at this point going into the challenge that he was going to do it? What did you think his chances of success were? What was the mind frame?
So I'd say after about 2-3 months, I started to learn a lot about Ash, and in particular his mental strength. On many of the sort of joint sessions that we did, we'd often talk about kind of what he was going through. He is, as you know, extremely kind and extremely open, and he would often really reach out and support me with some of the things that I would be struggling with. And I realized at that point that mentally he had the hardest bit already down. Often that's the trickiest bit when you try to support the athlete to believe in themselves that they can achieve something like this. And that was already there. So in a way, I thought, you know what, if we can get him anywhere near close to physically able to do this, I think mentally he'll be in the right frame of mind to make it possible. Now, the bit that I was still worried about was the risk of injury. I thought the risk of injury was high, just given the sort of the long list of past injuries he's had. And so I'd say it took about a further few more months. It was about a month or two when we were just about starting the taper that his sort of results from sort of the strength element and when I reviewed his performance, in particular his running performance, I could see that he had made massive strides. He'd been really dedicated with the training. I think he missed one session over the entire 7 months, which, is pretty unheard of. And so when we got to that start line, I fully believed that he had a good shot. I still didn't 100% believe it was possible. I think that would have been, there's very few people that I would have thought that this would have been 100% possible, and all of them would be in the sort of elite sportsman category. So there were still elements that I was worried about. I was in particularly worried about him getting a stress fracture given his weight. I was worried about him tearing his soleus again, on that run. And in fact, that's why we put the run first. We were just like, get the hardest bit out of the way.
Because that's counter to like the usual triathlon structure, right?
Yeah, very much counter, and it was counter for that reason. We wanted him to hit that run in as good a condition as possible. So essentially, start off, and part of that, it backfired a little at the beginning because he threw out a lot of my pacing plans at the beginning because he felt so good and he was so much fitter than he'd ever been, and so they were running up some crazy hills and doing all sorts of pretty nuts stuff, which definitely didn't help him. But luckily, I think they quickly realized that, okay, this is not going to work for this many days. So we put it at the start. So at that start line, I thought he had a good chance, but I definitely didn't. There was no way I was thinking this was in the bag. No way.
One thing you said on Instagram on a video you did, I think he'd either just started or just before he started. You were talking about the challenge to come, the process of it, and one thing you said was the way we've programmed this is for Ash to get stronger as he goes on. And when I heard that, I just thought, what? Well, like I have no idea, and like I'm, obviously I'm not you, Has, but I'm pretty clued up on physiology. I'm a PT myself, clued up on nutrition, all these things. But I just thought I can't conceive how he's going to get stronger. And I thought you were just kind of giving a bit of marketing hype to hype him up and hype the challenge up. Not that him or the challenge needed it, but I joined him the first weekend when I joined them, him and Matt, I think they were 12 days in. And between the 12th day and the 13th day, I could even see them getting stronger over the period of 24 hours. And then I rejoined them again a week later, and it was like they were new men. And they said, yeah, we're not, the pains we were feeling a week ago, we're not feeling anymore. They were going faster. They were much harder to keep up with. Their pace had increased within the space of a week, and they were, like 20 days deep at this point. So he did indeed. And since then, I've seen him on the kayak leg for a few days. Obviously, mentally, he's got stronger, and I did expect that because, like you said, knowing Ash, like the mental was not the part that was ever in question. It was obviously can his body physically keep up with the physical demands. So obviously, mentally, he's got stronger. But I've seen him with my own eyes physically get stronger as well. Talk to me about how exactly that happens. How does somebody get physically stronger over 3 months when they're running over a marathon every day for 33 days, cycling 100 miles a day for 2 weeks or whatever it was, and then kayaking over a marathon a day for another 30 days plus?
Yeah, no, like totally. Like it was built into the program, if that makes sense. And it's all about getting his body to a point where when he starts that challenge, the ability to tolerate the level of stress that he was going to do, so over a marathon each day, and his body's ability to recover would be within the hours from when he finished that day to the next day. And that comes with just training him up to get his body to that position. So, for example, when you first start off, you go for those few K run, it can take maybe 2-3 days before you're able to do it. So what we needed to do was get him to a point where he can do 27, 28 miles and recover within 12 hours. And that just comes with regular, repeated practice of slowly bringing it down. So as we went from week to week, what was happening was his recovery between was just getting shorter and shorter, just allowing for that. And we had to make sure that he maximized every other element so that the sleep was dialed in. Things like just adapting the environment, eye masks, making sure that the room is really, really comfortable, temperature isn't too hot, making sure that the nutrition is dialed in so that when he's both in the event and afterwards, that he's getting the right stuff to maximize and speed up that recovery. And ensuring that when he is doing the actual activities, he's doing it at a pace that is maintaining his aerobic capacity, but not stressing out his physiology. So when he's doing it, he is in a comfortable zone. Okay, really comfortable zone. So he's not building up that stress and fatigue to a high level. And it was actually a much lower zone than what he had trained at. So he had that step down. So in a way, when he was going to the challenge, he was doing things at a lower intensity. And so that was enough to give him the ability to recover quicker because the insult was less. So he could now recover quicker because we had been training that in. And if we didn't have that built in, if we didn't get him dialed in where he could do that, he would have just run out. He would have just run out of energy, of ability as it went on. We had to get him to a point where his body could tolerate that. And it's all about, as I said before, raising the ceiling of his physiology. So therefore, this intensity that I was doing his run is now feels like what used to be a fast walk. That's essentially what you get to. So for many people, if I said go for a fast walk for this number of hours each day, they can do it. The body is matched up to do that. I just needed to get his body to be able to do a run at what for most people physiologically would be a fast walk. And that's the key. That's the key. So although it's an incredible achievement for nearly everyone, for Ash's actual physiology, he got to a point where doing those runs, doing those bikes, they weren't all-out efforts. They weren't even close to all-out efforts. And so he doesn't feel like you finished at the London Marathon or someone else has finished at the 100-mile bike ride. You get to that point where suddenly it's how you felt when you did a 5K run or when you went for a cheeky hour bike ride. So it's that there's those combinations. It's those combinations that when he starts that challenge, he gets stronger. And I told him, and in fact, I said those first 20, 25 days of the run, they're going to be the hardest because your body's going to start adapting to it. And then after a while, it will then start normalizing it yet further. And in fact, by sort of day 25 to 28, he was starting to feel so much better. And from an energy perspective, when he was on the bike, he was motoring along. We were flying through. And it was just really testament that he had got himself in great physical condition. And so I was feeling so much more confident. When he started that kayak leg, I knew that his body would be able to do it. I just didn't know whether the conditions would play to his favor. And he had some really tough days on the kayak, and hopefully he has some easy ones till Saturday. But the kayak was always a challenge because there are elements you cannot control in that no amount of training would have prepared him for.
Yeah, that's it. Each of them, and he said this himself, each of them brought their own challenge. Obviously, the run, highest risk of injury, and it's just the most physically demanding on the body in a physical way, and I mean like a literal physical way. You're pounding your legs into the ground.
Yeah, harder to take on nutrition as well on the run. That's another thing.
Yeah, of course,
kayaking and cycling, you can take on food pretty easy. Your body can digest it, but running and moving around, you're really limited with the amount that you can take on per hour.
Yeah, as well. I mean, just speaking from personal experience, what I find whenever I'm doing something, endurance, ultra endurance based, that's running, I can't consume fat because just fat sits so heavy that when you're actually moving your whole body up and down, you just can't move the same. Whereas when you're rowing or like on a bike, because you don't actually have that full body movement, your body's able to digest something. So you can just drink like 2 liters of milk and you've got 1,000 calories, which, like you said, just isn't an option when you're running. And he said that the cycle was maybe the most actually energy demanding because it was the longest days, the longest mileage. And then, as you just highlighted with the kayak, you just have so many things that are out of your control, and it's cold, it's wet, it's miserable.
And uncomfortable as well. Anyone that's actually gone kayaking, it is not comfortable in the slightest. Like your back, your bum, the sores. I don't even. Oh God, he's in a bad way. Put it that way. He's going to need some healing.
Yeah, I mean, and the benefit of like doing it in the Mediterranean in the summer would be it would be nice and warm and bliss. You go in the water, it'd be a nice cool temperature. I mean, this summer we're having is just another discussion in itself. Yeah. It's done him and anyone else that's having to expose themselves to the British summer at the moment. It's just doing it's not doing anybody any favours. But yeah, just one more note on that. Something as well that you said when we were both running with him, you gave me a couple of insights into the actual adaptations that are happening in the body. And it's I think that's one of the most, physically speaking, one of the most marvelous things about humans, about the human body, our ability to adapt. You said by day 25, your joint's going to be full of synovial fluids. You're going to have more red blood cells. There's so many processes going on in the body that you're putting your body under a demand, and the wondrous machines that we are, our body finds ways. It has all these pathways to then not say, oh, you just can't take on this demand. It finds a way to accommodate us and accommodate the crazy things we put it under.
Yeah, our body is our number one helper, but also we can run some serious risks with it. And the reason I say that is because if, for example, you live a sedentary lifestyle, your body will actively start to decondition you because it is a serious taskmaster. It is efficient. If you are not using your joints to a certain degree, if you're not using your muscles, if you're not using your bones, it will start to break them down. And we call it osteosarcopenic obesity. This is where you're consuming too much for your needs and you are not activating your stress signals in order to promote building. So the osteo element is that you are losing bone density. Okay, so thinning of the bones, because if your bones don't need to be strong, then they won't be strong. Sarcopenic, that's all down to lack of muscles. If you do not need high functioning, good muscle bulk, then it simply will break down your muscles. And obviously the obesity element is it will deposit and it will store fat. Now, if you give the body the right signals, as you quite rightly said, it will make millions of adaptations. And I suspect most of them we still don't even know. Like, we haven't been able to identify. As science develops, we will understand yet further. But just as simple as if, let's say, me and you move to Peru at 4,000 or 5,000 meters elevation, your body will start producing more red blood cells. And then that same thing happens if we put it under regular stress and we get ourselves breathless regularly. Our body goes, we're getting breathless a lot. That's not good. Let me adapt the body. Let me improve the heart pump functioning so that it's more efficient. Let's get more red blood cells going in. Let's activate more motor units within our muscles so that we utilize it better. And all these things, all these adaptations, they will all start happening. And the whole point of good training is giving it the right signals. It's identifying where are your weaknesses or what are your goals. And then a training program should be designed to give enough signals to the body in that particular area to create that adaptation. It's not the training that's making you faster. It's the body's reaction to the training that's doing it. Okay. And that's why it's not just about putting in the loads. It's not about doing just that interval session. If you then do not fuel it right, and you do not get adequate sleep and adequate hydration, then you won't get all the benefits. The body needs that in order to actually support it in making those adaptations. If you put harmful substances in your body, whether that be alcohol or other drugs, these will all inhibit those adaptations. And so it's really important that people are mindful when they are training, that they think, okay, what is it that I want to achieve? Work backwards, decide what that's going to be, and then your training program should be reflective of that. And once you realize those connections, suddenly you can just be so much more effective in the time that you spend, and you can devote each week with the results that you then see. And because we all have different ambitions. Some people want to just build up muscle bulk. Other people want to increase flexibility. Some people want to improve coordination and maybe skill set in a particular discipline. And so everyone's training should be different. It should all be based on kind of what those are. Even amongst, let's say, triathletes, who are probably the main group that I would work with, it all depends on which discipline is it that they're trying to improve. Like, what is the current weakness? Are they struggling with the sort of the end section where they're running out of energy? Are they struggling from at the beginning to get themselves up to speed? Is it a nutrition issue? All these things can be trained, and it's just about getting that body to create those signals to get the adaptation.
3 top tips for somebody that wants to get into endurance training, that says they want to do their first triathlon. What are your 3 top tips for them for their training?
So tip number 1 is work on the foundation of what you're going to build. So what I mean by that is, there's no point starting a plan like this if your sleep's a mess, your diet's a mess, if you're got issues with alcohol, smoking, etc. Like, it will only add to your stress. Okay, it will only make things more difficult, and you will feel awful when you don't and are not able to complete the training. Get them in the right place. Even if you think they're good, get them as good as possible. Even people that are getting good sleep can get better sleep. Roger Federer actually called sleep his superpower. He said it was such a superpower that he wouldn't even mention it to his rivals. Like, he wouldn't even mention that he was putting so much effort into getting the highest quality sleep humanly possible, because that was his key difference and what it was allowed him to operate at such a high level for so long. So get those other pillars right, okay? So sleep, nutrition, stress levels, get that all sorted so that you can start from a good base. Number 2 is, do not compare yourself to anyone else, okay? Do not compare yourself. I promise you, there's always someone faster. There's always someone that can go longer. And there's always, someone that's done an event that you haven't, okay? That's always the case. And all it will do will steal the joy that you get from the various milestones that you have. So be mindful and instead be inspired by what other people can do, okay? Be inspired by that. And then the third tip is get structure. Okay. Don't just do things. Oh, I've got an hour. I'm just going to go for a run. Okay. Like, an hour is precious. What is that run going to be? Like, what's the plan for that run? What do you need to work on? If, for example, you're struggling to maintain running for a good period of time, you're getting tired really quickly, not covering many kilometers, then you need to work on a slow, low intensity run. It may well be that you're doing fast paced walking with a bit of running if you can't maintain it, and just building up the length. If it's that you want to improve your speed, your 5K time, you want to bring that down, then you need to start chucking in some strengthening. Maybe that's through hill repeats, maybe that's through sprints, maybe that's for interval sessions. So purpose is essentially what I'm trying to say. Don't just do a run or go for a swim or a cycle. A lot of the time, people just get in what we call junk miles, where yes, it's great that you're being active, and that's brilliant. But often, if you want to get the sort of the quickest gains, you need to be purposeful. Use that hour wisely, construct it wisely. And if you're unsure about what that looks like, you have no idea how to put together an interval session, no idea how to do hill repeats, then there is so much resources out there. Obviously, I share a lot of my social media platform to support people starting off. But for example, the running channel have got lots of useful training plans for you to do. There's so much out there online to help you structure it. I would highly recommend you look at that first and apply what you do to that.
Your top 5 exercises for the human being looking to stay fit and healthy.
Okay, this is really important. So I'm going to talk from a longevity perspective. So what I mean by longevity is where we can live healthy and good functioning lives for as long as possible. And for that, there's some key bits. So the first 3 are all going to be strength-based exercises, okay? And what we need to think about is doing things now that will mean that we can achieve some pretty normal things when we're 70, 80 years old. Okay. So what I mean by that is, when I'm 80, I still want to be able to, for example, if something drops on the floor, I want to be able to pick it up. Okay. Without having to get someone else to do it for me. So what do I need to do to train that? Well, deadlift. Okay. Now, deadlift, make sure that you're doing that correctly and that you're doing it with good technique, because you can hurt yourself for sure if you're not doing it right. So I'd highly recommend speaking to a PT to get that dialed, or at the very least, look at some good videos and video yourself, because often what you think you're doing, you ain't doing. The deadlift's an important one. Second one is farmer's carry. Okay, so this is where you're carrying weights in either arm, walking along. Now, the reason for the farmer's carry is because I want to be able to carry my shopping, carry my stuff around. And for you, in fact, one study looked at what kind of farmer's carry do you need to be able to do in your 30s, mid 30s, for you to be able to carry the average bag of shopping each arm when you're 75. And in fact, what they found was for men, they need to do 75% of the body weight split over each arm, and they need to hold it for 60 seconds. Okay. For women, it's 50% of your body weight. So give it a try. Go to your gym, or if you've got stuff at home, see if you can manage it. And in fact, grip strength is got really good correlation with overall health. If you can maintain your grip strength for longer, we know that correlates strongly both for minimizing your risk of long-term conditions and also having really good quality of life in later years. Now, the third and final strength-based exercise is the squat, okay? And the squat is because I want to get out of a chair. I want to always be able to get out of a chair. And you need to be able to squat a really good amount when you're young in order to get out of a chair when you're 18. I think that's what I need to explain. As we get older, there's always decline. There's always decline. But if you push your line up, so therefore that decline doesn't reach the threshold at which you're not able to walk 5 miles per hour, you're not able to pick something up off the floor, you're not able to carry shopping, that's when the issues come. And I can promise you now, as someone that has to spend a lot of time in my GP role looking at people, doing home visits, looking at people that are really frail, the quality of life when this happens is really poor. And you can live the last decade, even 15 years of your life, needing constant care. And it's not the way that anyone wants to live. So those are 3 strength exercises that are really going to hopefully make you happy and healthy for longer. Now, The other two elements that I think is really important is cycling. I think cycling, whether that be on a static bike or outside, is brilliant just because it's a really good low impact way of developing your cardiorespiratory fitness. I've already focused on getting the strength element, that's covered. The cycling's all there just to work that cardiorespiratory fitness. You may think, oh, why aren't you saying running? Look, I love running. You know, running is something that is so joyful. But if I only had 5 exercises to pick from, cycling wins just from a lower injury risk and a more specific training that you can apply to it to build up your VO2 max. Because in fact, VO2 max is probably, no, actually it's not probably, it is the most powerful indicator for your all-cause mortality. What we mean by all-cause mortality is your risk of essentially dying of any cause. In fact, the top 5% VO2 max compared to the bottom 25% of the population are 400% less likely to die at any given time. Okay, 400%. Like there is nothing else. There's no specific other indicator that you can look at that's that impactful when it comes to reducing your risk of an early death. So yeah, cycling. And then the final bit, and I think you're probably going to be surprised by this, it's dancing. Okay.
I thought you were going to say swimming. I assumed swimming was coming in as the final one.
Well, swimming is brilliant. So don't get me wrong. I'm a medical advisor for Swim England, so I'm not gonna say anything against it. But you've only asked me for 5, and the reason I'm putting in dancing is because a number of studies have shown that out of all the different forms of physical activity, this is the most impactful for health span, okay, for just improving that period of time with good quality of life. And when you break it down, you understand why. What does dancing do? Now, when I say dancing, this is where we have specific, you're not just going out clubbing. This is where you have specific sessions where you go and you do a dance class, you're learning new moves, and you're dancing with other people. And we know that's useful because, firstly, it's fun. So it's more likely that people will maintain it year after year because that's what this is all about. Physical activity isn't something that you just do for a period of time and then you're now perfect. So like, for example, if Ash suddenly stopped tomorrow, a lot of the benefits that he has and built up, they'll slowly go and disappear. So making it fun is good. The other bit is the social element. We know that when we connect with other people and we do things with other people, that makes us feel good. So from a mental health perspective, brilliant. Dance is great for balance. Okay. One of the key killers of older people is falls. And we really need to work on balance, and dancing does that. Cognitively, you're learning new moves. With running and cycling, you're just doing it over and over again. There's only you can't really learn it. You're just doing it. But dancing, you're learning a new move. You're constantly testing yourself cognitively. So that's lowering your risk of things like dementia. It's also brilliant for endurance because often you can dance for longer because your perceived effort is lower because you're having fun and you're just concentrating on getting the moves. You're not constantly thinking like you are on a run going, oh my God, I'm knackered. Oh my God, I'm knackered. Oh my God. You know, so it helps to distract people. And when they do activity monitors, they actually find that people are able to do longer cardiorespiratory efforts when dancing compared to the same people if you made them do a run. It's very interesting. It's kind of like that. I noticed that with younger guys playing football that often come to the clinic, or young women, of course, as well, where they can run distances in a football match that they can't even dream of doing in a run. And it's all down to sort of the mind's ability. When you're in a match, you're just focusing on the ball and the game and trying to score a goal or, you know, or win the match. It helps to distract you when it comes to your perceived effort. So those are the 5. So we've got 3 strength exercises, and I'm focusing on strength just because it is the kind of the armor to allow you to have good health. If you have a good, strong structure, then you can actually apply. And then we've got cycling in order to improve that VO2 max and that cardiorespiratory element. And then we've got dancing essentially for everything else.
That's brilliant. I love the thought process behind those 5, behind that whole answer. And dancing coming in clutch, yeah, absolutely did not expect that. But I love that you've included it. I think that's, imperative, especially like you said, for the social element as well. I mean, we talk about all these protocols. You've got people in Sardinia that are drinking alcohol, staying up late partying, and they're living longer than everyone, you know, in England and America because
100%.
They've got community. They've got, you know, a good quality of life socially, mentally. So yeah, that's a really important thing that we can often overlook when we're involved in the physical.
100%. Movement at the end of the day, it has to be fun. Do you know what I mean? The reason I go and do events all across the world in triathlon is because it's fun. If I just had to constantly cycle and run all the time, I'll be honest, after a while, you're probably going to get a bit bored. But I do it because it takes me places. You know, I can go and do events, I can meet new people, I can run with other people, I can see new sites. If you don't build in the fun into whatever training program you're doing, you will slowly run out of motivation. So make sure, no matter what it is, whether you're a strength-based athlete, an endurance athlete, whatever, build in the fun.
As a final question then, obviously most of this conversation has centered around Ash. Give me your finishing thoughts. Like I said, I'll keep touching wood. I don't want to jinx him. But
Yeah, I don't want to either.
And unless an act of God intervenes, he is going to do this. You know, the Ultraman's going to do what he told you who's going to do, what he told the world he was going to do, and he's going to be the first man in the world to do it. Yeah. Give me your final finishing thoughts on what Ashley Cain's been able to accomplish.
I think what he's done is incredible. Absolutely incredible. You know, it's so easy now to look back on it and be like, yeah, you know, he did it, etc. But if someone asked me to put money, let's say if he asked me to put my house on him completing it, no way would I have done that. Because at the start, no matter how prepared he was, it's a huge, colossal effort. But I've just been so impressed, not by just what he's done, but how he's done it. You know what I mean? Like, he has just gone about it in the most professional and the most humble and the most kind of connecting way as possible. Throughout all of it, he's wanted to just engage with everyone along the route. You know, like, I think that's what's been most powerful for him. And I realized, once I realized that this guy is powered by a fuel that comes from an endless supply, that's what his kids have given him, I started to realize that, you know what, I'm not even sure an act of God would stop him from getting to that finish line. In one way or another, he will somehow find it to the finish line. So, yeah, Ash, absolute legend. So proud. Just can't believe you've done it, and can't wait to see that finish line.